This is Keys to the Shop, episode 304, Inside the National Coffee Data Trends Specialty Coffee Report, with Katie von der Leith of the SCA. Well, hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Keys to the Shop, where we give you insights, inspiration, and the tools you need to grow as a coffee service professional. My name is Chris DeFirio. I'm your host for the show. Always glad to have you along today. Don't forget to subscribe to Keys to the Shop so you're always updated with new content as it comes out. Just hit subscribe wherever you are listening to this show right now. And also, if you have the opportunity to share these episodes or the show with a friend, that is also greatly appreciated. Now, today's episode is brought to you in part by Keys to the Shop Consulting. Keys to the Shop Consulting focuses on helping you improve your cafe's operations through leveling up your systems, your people, your quality, and if you're just starting out in coffee, helping you start on the right foot and you lay the foundation for success right from the word go. There's a lot of different ways that Keys to the Shop Consulting can work with you, whether remotely or on-site through cafe assessments and training. And I would love to talk with you about what's going on in your business and how Keys to the Shop Consulting might be able to help you gain clarity, solve problems, or lay foundations for success. To do that, you can just email me, chris@keystotheshop.com, and we can set up a free discovery call and see how Keys to the Shop Consulting can help you. Again, the email address for Keys to the Shop Consulting, chris@keystotheshop.com. Now, Keys to the Shop is brought to you by Prima Coffee. Prima Coffee is not just providing you with world-class commercial coffee equipment, but their focus at Prima Coffee is to help you select the right equipment for your business. So whether you're looking for brewers, grinders, or espresso machines, or things like under-counter refrigeration for your new shop or your upgrading, Prima is an incredible resource to help you get outfitted and supplied with the absolute best. They curate the best from all over the world. It's a great website, prima-coffee.com, and you can peruse that and see what they have on offer there. Keys to the Shop listeners get 5% off their orders when using the code KEYS5 at checkout. That's KEYS and the number 5 at checkout gives you 5% off. Again, visit prima-coffee.com/keys and use that code KEYS5 for 5% off. And if you're in the market for commercial coffee equipment, you want to work with the best, then you need to work with prima-coffee.com. This episode is also brought to you by the Barista Series from Pacific. The Barista Series is the standard for excellence in plant-based beverages worldwide. The best coffee bars, the best baristas prefer this because it's designed and tested by them, the world's best, so that no matter what you get from their complete lineup of plant-based beverages, you can expect it to stand up to the heat from steaming, have awesome texture for latte art, and be balanced in the cup. So the coffee is always the focus of the beverage, and it's a great experience for your plant-based customers. So check them out over at pacificfoodservice.com. Get it in your store and try it today. I believe your customers are going to love it, and you're going to be impressed too. So if you want to serve world-class plant-based beverages in your shop, then you need to be using the Barista Series from Pacific.
Hi, I'm Bruce Tulgan, author of The Art of Being Indispensable at Work, published by Harvard Business Review Press. If you like listening to this show as much as I enjoyed being a guest on this show, maybe you'll be a fan of my new podcast, The Indispensables. Each week, I ask my guests what sets them apart in the workplace, what makes them tick, and what makes them so successful. I've interviewed some amazing people at all levels and organizations of all shapes and sizes with some amazing stories, including the former Chief of Staff of the United States Army, General Dennis Reimer, New York Times columnist Ron Lieber, Kara Golden, the founder and CEO of Hint, and many, many more. Consider please listening and subscribing to The Indispensables on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening to this show.
All right, everybody. Well, today we are going to be talking all about coffee data trends. We're talking about the 2021 National Coffee Data Trends Specialty Coffee Report that was produced jointly by the NCA, which is the National Coffee Association, and the SCA, Specialty Coffee Association. And to do that, we're going to be talking with the research program manager at the Specialty Coffee Association, Katie van der Leith. Now, Katie van der Leith is a research program manager at the Specialty Coffee Association and Coffee Science Foundation, where she supports and grows the coffee research program. And prior to joining the SCA, Katie earned master's degrees in international agricultural development and agricultural resource economics from the University of California, Davis, and she also helped design and teach an undergraduate course about coffee and has conducted small-scale coffee research projects in Brazil and Ecuador. This report sheds a lot of light on consumer habits as they relate to both specialty and non-specialty coffee and parses out the trends in the U.S. based on everything from socioeconomic status to ethnicity, where people like to consume coffee and how often, either at home or in a cafe, their attitudes towards both of those things, how adventurous they are with the types of coffee that they're trying. There's a lot here to discuss, and Katie does a fantastic job breaking this all down for us, and we'll have a link in the show notes also to this report for you to download. It is free to download, which is awesome. So be sure to check that out in the show notes. If you run a retail operation, if you're in charge of the operations at your cafe, then this is a great conversation to help you gain insights here that will help guide your marketing efforts and the products you choose to carry. So without further ado, let's get right to the conversation. Here now is my conversation with the research program manager of the SCA, Katie van der Leith. Well, Katie, welcome to Keys to the Shop. Such a pleasure to have you on the show. How's it going today?
I'm doing well. Thanks so much for having me.
I am very pleased to be talking with you today, and there's so much to talk about in this report that has huge implications on what we do with our businesses, how we form our marketing and service. And so I'm really pleased to dive into this today. I wanted to start with a little bit of a background, and if you would tell us just your role with the SCA, also how this survey came about.
Yeah, so my role at the SCA is I'm a research program manager, which I've been at the SCA for 2 years now. And my role is to shepherd as much research as possible to the benefit of the coffee industry. So this is one research project that I was really happy to be a part of. And this is the Specialty Coffee Breakout Report is a collaboration between the National Coffee Association and the Specialty Coffee Association. And this is the first time that we've actually collaborated in this way and have been able to have this breakout report that focuses specifically on specialty coffee and also is available free for download for folks. So yeah, we started this collaboration earlier in 2021. And so this is the first specialty coffee breakout report, which is what we'll be talking about today, but it's actually a subset of a larger survey that's been done that the NCA has been collecting since 1950. So every year since 1950, the NCA has been collecting data about coffee consumers' drinking behavior, which I'm pretty sure makes it the longest standing coffee consumer study as far as I know.
Okay, so what prompted the collaboration and this report? What was the impetus behind this?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of reasons why. One reason was that we realized with the SCA or the NCA, excuse me, that we needed to be able to collect more data. As I mentioned, this study has been done once a year since 1950, which is, a fantastic amount of data, but we're also seeing that there's definitely a more temporal consumption patterns that are going on. So collecting data just once a year we think that there's trends that we're not capturing by doing that. So by being able to, gather our resources together with the National Coffee Association, we'll actually be able to conduct this study twice a year. So once in fall and once in summer, and that way we can we're really thinking about cold coffee trends. So being able to see if there's, our hypothesis is that there will be more cold coffee consumption in the summer, and we want to be able to measure that and capture that and compare that to the coffee trends that are happening, in the colder months.
So now this report has come out, and it is available for download, which is really cool because a lot of these things were for the information that it has are sometimes behind a paywall. And, when it comes to like scientific reports and data like this. So this is something everybody should definitely be taking advantage of. When you went into this, what were the expectations? I know that going into projects like this, you try to be neutral, try to be not biased, but I mean, there has to be some kind of assumptions going in that, we're going to tap into this data and here's what we might expect to find.
Yeah, I think from our end, we definitely did try to come in with, minimal assumptions as possible, but of course we all have our biases. And I think for us at the Specialty Coffee Association, being the Specialty Coffee Association, all of our consumer research had really had a pretty, laser focus on specialty coffee consumers. It was often like a prerequisite to take part in our consumer studies. And so I know that we were really interested and excited to see a more holistic picture of coffee consumption. And I think even the idea that there's a hard line between specialty coffee and, commercial coffee or whatever you'd like to call it, I think that, there's a lot of, there's not a hard line. And so to be able to access data that is just a better snapshot of the entire industry is something that we were really excited about. And there's definitely some stuff that we ended up being very surprised by in the data that I'm sure we'll get to later. But I think, just not totally sure what to expect, but definitely excited about the prospect of understanding the coffee market better as a whole.
So you mentioned the line between, non-specialty and specialty. And I guess a question might come up like, maybe I'll play devil's advocate here and say, well, who cares about people not drinking specialty coffee? We just need more information about people drinking, or we just need more information about, our people, our specialty coffee customers. What is the value of having a bigger picture than just our camp?
Yeah, I think it's incredibly valuable for a number of reasons. I think because we don't have, I think many people and many maybe stakeholders have their own definition of specialty coffee. There's not really one unifying definition that everyone agrees upon. So if we say we only want to focus on specialty coffee, we might be excluding groups who, by someone else's definition are specialty coffee drinkers. So I think it's kind of myopic to just focus on, one kind of ill-defined group of people. I do want to point out, I think it's interesting. So for this report, one thing that changed since we began our involvement with the National Coffee Association. So for the first time in this report, historically the term gourmet had been used, and we changed the term to all the gourmet terms to specialty for this report, which was important for us, being the Specialty Coffee Association, because we think that that term better describes or is just more up to date. But another change that was made in this year's report is, or something to note, I think, is that the way that specialty coffee is, or specialty beverages are defined in this report is very open-ended. And so as we go through some of the data, I think it might be helpful to just share what the definition is about specialty coffee before we start like slicing the data. So for this report, they define specialty coffee as any coffee that's made with gourmet coffee beans, and then also including espresso-based beverages, non-espresso-based beverages, and ready-to-drink coffee. So any espresso-based beverage, any non-espresso-based beverage, which is mostly cold drinks, and then also ready-to-drink coffee. So this report in general, there's some self-identification by consumers in that what they believe is specialty coffee by self-identifying what are gourmet beans, and then also just a wide umbrella for including all espresso-based beverages and non-espresso-based beverages, which I think is probably pretty different than what a lot of specialty coffee industry folks might think of as specialty coffee. So just a baseline with everyone. That's sort of the frame from which we'll be working, and which the entire report is based on that definition of specialty coffee.
Okay, so the
So I went on a
self-identifying.
tangent there.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, the self-identified specialty coffee enthusiast, the gourmands, the aficionados, and whatever terms they want to use for themselves, have obviously a little bit more of a loose definition than we have, which we already just said. It's kind of loose even within the professional world. So
Mhm.
in this study, then how did that? Why is that important, or is it important that we allow for that self-identification from the consumers and not create a more rigid standard by which to judge the data?
Yeah, I think it's definitely more of a ground up understanding. To me, it feels a little bit more democratic, but that also feels like a value word. But it feels more like a ground up defining of specialty coffee. And I think um, more than I like the idea that as an industry, I don't think it's the best idea to tell people that if they think their coffee is specialty, that it's actually not. That doesn't seem like a great idea, and I don't think that that's something that we should aim towards in any way. So I think it's a really what we lose in interpreting the data by coming in with a really rigid definition of specialty coffee. We gain in learning what consumers, at large think is specialty coffee. So um, specialty coffee drinkers, self-identified in some ways, say that they like their coffee darker, that they like it sweetened. And so if we can, it's more of like just a ground up defining of specialty coffee to learn what regular quote unquote consumers think is specialty coffee. And then we can kind of compare that to what the industry thinks, not that the industry is a monolith, but, seeing where there might be those differences. I think is a really interesting exercise to do.
Okay, so let's get into that. The things that surprised you about what you found after aggregating all of the data that you received. What were the most surprising elements of this study?
One of the things that was most surprising is the number of people that are experimenting at home with coffee. So the data for this study was collected in January 2021 in the US. So I think for many places, folks were in some sort of state of lockdown, not completely, but so a lot of people are at home, and 62%, I think is the number. Yeah, 62% of specialty coffee drinkers tried a new type of coffee, whether that be like single serve or cold brew coffee or a whole bean coffee. Specialty coffee drinkers are experimenting a lot at home. A lot of folks bought new coffee brewing equipment. And so I think, in general, specialty coffee consumers are really, interested in experimenting. And I think that in and of itself is interesting, but also specialty coffee drinkers reported missing coffee shops quite a bit in like a number of different ways. So they're both experimenting at home, but they're also missing the social aspect of the coffee shop. They're missing the coffee at the coffee shop. They're missing trying new things at a coffee shop. And so I think having those two facts together is really interesting to me, that specialty coffee drinkers like to experiment at home, and then they also miss coffee shops. So sometimes there's this headline in the news that says like, our specialty coffee consumer is going to come back to coffee shops, sort of this dichotomy between at-home consumption and coffee shop consumption. And what I think this data says, to me at least, is that specialty coffee drinkers want to experiment at home and they want to learn and engage in coffee shops at the same time. So it's more of like a complementary relationship than an either or relationship, which I thought, that's my interpretation. And I thought that was really interesting.
It's encouraging, and it makes me wonder what the root cause of this is. The industry has been doing so much marketing about brewing coffee at home, and especially after COVID or during COVID, people are just pushing a lot more information about how to brew coffee at home. And I think people had been doing that for a long time, but it was just this crescendo of information out there. In lieu of being able to go to a coffee shop, you saw so many people saying, well, this is how you do a V60, this is how you do an AeroPress. and it was everywhere. It almost became a joke. And you weren't really a coffee shop unless you had a brewing video, which is fine. Everyone should have one. But I wonder how much of that is native to the non-COVID response and versus the reaction to just the kind of leveling up of our marketing to brew at home during COVID.
I wonder if maybe it's a cop-out to say it's both, but I do wonder if it's both. Like, it was already kind of a trend going on and then just completely amplified by folks being at home, drinking coffee, buying new equipment. That would be my best guess. Is it was an existing trend that was definitely amplified by stay-at-home orders.
And people did miss their coffee shops greatly, and you can tell. A lot of people were trying to recreate the things that they got in their coffee shops at home. And I know in the survey and the data shows that people weren't as successful as maybe they thought they were going to be. Like, I can't make it as well at home was kind of still a thing.
Yeah, they missed treating themselves, they missed the social aspect, and then also sort of a recognition that I've got a whole bunch of new coffee equipment and new coffee stuff, but it still doesn't taste quite the same as when I go get it in a coffee shop.
And so now, when it comes to experimentation with coffee, I imagine, some of this is related to also the availability of things like subscription services, whether related to, a subscription service of one roaster or things like Trade has, many roasters and Misto Box, etc. Is there any way to tell the difference between, whether people were experimenting with beans from their local coffee shop or also coffees from just all over that they had mail ordered from across the country and beyond?
Yeah, I don't think that the report, for those who have downloaded it, is very wonderfully dense. So I don't think it's in there. I don't want to say for certain in case I've missed it. But yeah, I'm not sure the provenance of, the subscription services. I did also, like, I'm sure many folks see that, Trade increased their subscription base by a huge percent. But yeah, as far as like the breakdown of where those beans are coming from, I couldn't say for certain.
It almost doesn't matter, right? Because the attitude is still there. Yeah, definitely. And I think in addition to this experimentation at home, it's just in general, specialty coffee drinkers are just really engaged with their coffee experience. Maybe we can talk about this now or later, but one of the things that I did want to point out is for specialty coffee consumers, in addition to things like roast and flavor, coffee consumers are really interested in like the provenance of their coffee. Like, was it fairly traded? Are the farmers getting paid? Was it, environmentally sustainably produced? And so I think they're engaging with coffee in multiple ways, like the flavor of coffee. They're experimenting. They miss the coffee shop atmosphere. They want to know where the beans are come. So just maybe that's not surprising, but now we have a good amount of data that shows that specialty coffee consumers just are interested and they're engaged and they want to learn, which I think is really exciting for our industry. 100%, because the old adage of specialty coffee has always been about educating the customer, and a lot of that was sort of like trying to force it on people. But it seems from this data that people are genuinely just curious, and they're mindful of what they're purchasing more and more, and it wouldn't be such a hard sell to actually give them information today as it might have been years ago, when they're just like maybe not into the idea of being as curious or being educated. But I don't know, maybe that's a big win for marketing and in combination with just trust through relationships.
Yeah, I feel like trust with your coffee shop is so important, especially as some of the data in the report shows that, for example, consumers they care more that coffee farmers were paid fairly than it's certified fair trade. So that shows to me that there's a little bit of like dissonance between the certification, and they just want to know that farmers are paid fairly. And I think that for that assurance, that comes from not a certification, but trust with your local coffee shop. And yeah, I do think that that's a huge component. And yeah, the education piece is really interesting, because I think for me, as coffee shops can educate people, I think that there's definitely a component of that. And I also like the idea of, in addition to education, or maybe sometimes instead of education, exposing people to different types of coffee. So instead of saying like, this is the best kind of coffee, or, to give a really silly example, like this is good coffee, this is not. Instead, dipping into that experimentation desires, like exposing people to a lot of different coffees, like asking them what they like. And I love that idea. In addition to education is exposure to new things, and new types of coffee. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for that.
Well, you hit the nail on the head, I think, because you've got, when you expose people to more options as a way of bringing them into the community of specialty coffee as a consumer, it's almost like you have to extend trust to them that their tastes can distinguish what is right for them, rather than having to dictate to them what is right.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think some of the data in this report about how diverse geographically, income-wise, ethnicity-wise, specialty coffee consumers are, I think it's important to, as we, don't want to dictate people's preferences, also thinking like, because specialty coffee drinkers are very diverse. And I think there's a lot of data here that sort of defies the stereotype of a specialty coffee consumer as, I'm, a more well-off, probably Caucasian or white person. I think that this data shows that specialty coffee drinkers are everywhere, and they have all different types of incomes, and being open and excited about the potential to meet all of these different types of coffee preferences. I don't know. I think it's exciting.
It is exciting. Yeah. I mean, our beans come from all over the world, and we could stand to embrace a little bit more diversity when it comes to, who we're communicating to and serving and reaching out to, et cetera. But I'm interested if you could dive a little bit deeper into what you're talking about in terms of the data in the report regarding diversity of ethnicity, socioeconomic status, and also location, because I did notice that there's a lot of people in the suburbs drinking specialty coffee.
I'll start out with the geographic distribution. I think my guess is that you're seeing such a large proportion of specialty coffee drinkers in the suburbs, not because the suburbs are like necessarily a giant hub for specialty coffee consumption, not that they're not, but I think it just mirrors more or less the distribution of the general population in the US. So I think it's just, about it's not exactly the same, but before this interview, actually, I went up to like the Pew Research website to see generally the geographic distribution of people in the US. And it more or less, there's some different, nomenclature being used, but it does seem like it kind of, the distribution of specialty coffee drinkers somewhat mimics the distribution of people. So, the biggest proportion of people living in the suburbs. So my takeaway from that is that there's specialty coffee drinkers everywhere.
Right. Well, in my head, I'm glad you brought that up. It's really interesting because I was thinking, I am seeing a lot of coffee bars open in places where you would call them coffee deserts, right? Or small towns, or places like not in the necessarily quote unquote hip areas. While the data from Pew Research might be defining the U.S., that part of the city as a suburb, or right. It is considered a suburb, but in my mind, it's like, no, that's the city, or vice versa. So I can see how that could kind of skew things and smear that a little bit. But it is interesting to think about, the distribution of people all over the place drinking specialty coffee versus where we normally associate people drinking specialty coffee in those urban, more let's say upscale, I guess upscale areas.
Yeah, high rent areas for sure. I do think that the pandemic definitely gave an advantage to the coffee shops that are more suburban, as people moved out of cities, and there was definitely a shift of people to suburban areas or even rural areas. I think in California, for the first time, we lost a seat in the House because people are not, California's not growing as much because people are moving out and they're moving to more suburbs or rural areas. So I think maybe in this data is some of that trend of people not going to work, people staying at home, and so coffee shops located closer to where people live have an advantage. And then also, I think during the pandemic, there was definitely a push to support local communities, local coffee shops in particular, and I think maybe those trends are playing into this data that was collected in January 2021.
It'll be interesting to see over the years how many of these trends persist. On the diversity of ethnicity and then, income levels, what did the report show, and how does that impact the way that we view our consumer base?
Yeah, so there's some really interesting findings in here, and going back to one of the original questions about what were your expectations, I think the data that we're about to talk about definitely defied some of my expectations about what we would find in this report. So the Hispanic Americans were one of the strongest categories across the board for specialty coffee consumption, and Asian Americans in second place across a number of different categories, and then to a lesser degree, Caucasian folks. So using the language of the report, they call past day penetrations. They ask these different groups, did you have a coffee within a specialty coffee beverage within the last day, so within the last 24 hours? And Hispanic Americans, 44% said that they had a specialty coffee, compared to Caucasian Americans, who said that they had 35% of those folks had a specialty coffee the day before. And so I think I'm a little bit, I think maybe we're seeing in that 35% number for Caucasian Americans, I wonder if that low number plays into the definition of specialty coffee that was used for this report. So that sort of self-identification piece, because, I don't know. I think if, third wave coffee has been around for quite some time, and I would definitely call third wave coffee specialty coffee. But if you have it every day, do you still call it specialty coffee? So I wonder I definitely think that there's a large contingent of Hispanic Americans that are drinking specialty coffee, Asian Americans for sure. But then I wonder if this lower number of Caucasian folks is maybe that is the right number, or if we're seeing some of that amorphousness in the definition of specialty coffee. Maybe people are underreporting their consumption of specialty coffee, but that's my hunch. I'm curious.
Right.
But yeah. So I don't know, that could be one thing that's happening, or regardless though, definitely a strong representation of Hispanic Americans and Asian Americans in the specialty coffee community.
Well, it's interesting too, because again, no matter what the correct lingo is, whether it's defined by the industry or by the individual, somebody thinks they're having a specialty coffee,
Mm-hmm.
they're having a special coffee experience, and they'll say, yeah, I had a really special coffee yesterday. And whether that meets our definition or not, I guess our next actions after knowing that is like, well, that's wonderful, because we're the specialty coffee industry, and that's what we're after, is serving special coffee experiences. And so to me, when I hear that, I'm like, well, we might be, and I say might, I'm almost guaranteeing that we miss large swaths of the communities around us because we define them out of relevancy.
No, I totally agree. And I think that that's one of the key takeaways from this report is maybe challenging ourselves as an industry to have a more expansive view of specialty coffee, and embracing this diversity, I think, is really important.
Another diversity metric here was the income level. And I noticed that mid to lower income brackets had a higher than, I won't say higher than usual, but just it was higher frequency of purchasing or consuming specialty coffee than when you got above 100,000 or 100,000 and above yearly. It seemed to be a lot lower. And I mean, was that surprising to you, or was that something you expected? And what's behind that?
I think there's a couple of things going on. I think part of it is similar to what we were talking about before with the geographic distribution. I just think that there's just fewer people making over $100,000 a year is my guess. That has part of it to do with it. Since the data is intended to be representative of the US, I think that, it's just there are fewer people making over 100,000 as compared to under 50K. But I also think that coffee is kind of seen as an affordable luxury. I feel like it's kind of silly, but sometimes when I read this data, I think about what's that show? Parks and Rec, the treat yourself. I feel like coffee is just a really nice way to treat yourself. It's sort of an affordable luxury. And I know at the beginning of the pandemic, there were a lot of predictions that like coffee consumption overall was going to take a dip, like people were unemployed, coffee shops shut down. And that's not to say that some coffee shops didn't struggle or some roasteries didn't struggle. We know that they did, but like in aggregate, coffee consumption didn't really go down. Maybe a touch, but like not what you would think given, the rates of unemployment at the time and whatnot. So I think coffee consumption is part of people's routine. I think that it is an affordable luxury, and you especially see that in those drinks I think that you can't make at home, those non-espresso based beverages, those cold coffee drinks that are hard to replicate. I think that sort of treat yourself or an affordable luxury is keeping coffee consumption a prevalent behavior even for those who maybe don't have a ton of disposable income.
That seems about right to me. I mean, it just feels like, when we talk about making coffee more accessible, and we talk about, on this show, we've talked about this thing where now we're roasting more medium to dark or more developed coffees. We're starting to, see everybody has multiple blends now. In a time in the industry, only a short number of years ago, blends were kind of frowned upon as we were kind of finding our own level of maturity as an industry, I guess. But the audience that we're playing to it seems like they are just gung ho for the product, and it's also important that we look to that metric and say, hey, we need to keep this being an affordable luxury, but presents the problem of charging more for coffee. We want to charge more for coffee. We don't want this to just be an experience for the people at the 100K and above. The elites can only buy this premium coffee. So it's an interesting balance because we want accessibility, but we also want to have people pay more for coffee at the same time. And I'm just curious about your perspective on that after looking through this study. Like, how do coffee shops respond to a metric like this in a practical way?
Yeah, I think that's the perennial challenge, is that exactly what you're saying, this tension between we want to make coffee more accessible, but we also want to have people value coffee more. And how do we do that? I wonder if there is a way to think about accessibility in terms of price and in terms of preferences. So like clearly there's a lot of people drinking coffee who make under $50,000 a year. I wonder if the places that they're drinking those coffees are different than the places where the $100,000 a year or more people are drinking coffee. So I feel like offering like a wide range of coffees in both in terms of price and also like flavor profiles, I feel like maybe is one way to both be more accessible in a single coffee shop and maybe ameliorate that challenge of providing both less expensive / more accessible coffees and also those higher priced coffees. I know in my neighborhood, I've been seeing, I live in Sacramento, California, and I've been seeing a lot more of like the blended coffees. Like one of the coffee shops near me has like just a slushy machine, and it's a, I would say like a higher end or definitely a specialty coffee shop. And I think that maybe a couple years ago or more, that would have been like you're saying, like, is that a single origin coffee slushy? I don't know, but now I think, yeah, sort of this, if we can offer, and this is a small thing, I don't think by any means this is the crux of the issue, but I do think that offering a variety of coffees at different flavors and at different prices can work towards that dual goal that you're mentioning.
That's a great point. Yeah, in the variety of experiences that we were talking before, people want that coffee shop experience and they can make it at home, but a lot of people choose to go into the coffee shop for that special experience. And and who are we to say also that people within the lower income range on in this data aren't willing to pay the higher prices for coffee based on how much they value the experience of it?
Yeah, absolutely. And the more we can meet people's desires and add value to those experiences, in the most holistic way possible, I think the better off we'll be.
So, our audience here is mainly coffee shop people, and we want people to come to our stores, but there isn't, like we talked about before, people are experimenting at home. They're curious. And it's not like because they can't make it at home the exact same way that you do, that they're going to stop. In fact, it seems like there is a lot of people, based on this study, that are drinking coffee outside the home. One, is that a good sign? And then two, I mean, how do we come alongside that as professionals and make that a good experience too, even though we're not in control of it,
The exposure education piece is really important. So if a coffee shop can be not only the place where you get your coffee, you have a great coffee while you're there, you love the ambiance, all that whole like in the shop experience. But if that coffee shop can be sort of the touchstone for you to learn new coffee things, like you were saying, brewing videos and stuff. I've been looking for classes in my area about how to, do different brewing techniques. And I think if the coffee shop can frame itself as maybe not the expert, because I feel like not the expert, or a place and a resource for new coffee experiences, I think that that's one way that you can both provide that awesome in-person experience, that unique in-person experience that folks are looking for, but then also encourage them, whether that's through videos or even like in your in-person interactions, asking them, what kind of coffee do you like? What are you brewing at home? Have you ever tried, a pour over? Do you have a grinder? I think engaging people both in their in-store, in-cafe experience, and then also trying to engage them in their out-of-cafe experience, I think will be, is an important competency to build. And I also wonder too, I think this report is fantastic. It's obviously got a ton of information, and there's a lot we can learn from it. But one thing I don't have a sense of that maybe I could ask you is, do you think that coffee shops are regularly like doing consumer research? Because I feel like that would be a really interesting way to gather more information about like just knowing what your consumers are brewing at home. Maybe you can ask them and then start developing a better understanding of what your customers want, not only in the shop, but what they're doing outside of the shop. So yeah, do you know if I can ask you a question, do you know if coffee shops and maybe roasters too are doing that sort of like grassroots consumer research, or is that not too common?
Well, I think historically it's a yes, but it's a lowercase y, and here's why. And it's because we are collecting data all the time in the form of sales, And we can go back now, especially these days, and look back and see exactly what people have purchased, how many times they purchase it. We can track credit card numbers and repeat purchases and stuff like that. Do we do that to get that data and aggregate it and make an assumption about, next year, what people might like come fall? Not in a scientific way, I don't think. Not as much as maybe we could. I think a lot of people pay just enough attention to have a gut sense that this might be the right path, but maybe would have a little bit more bravery in the process of making decisions for the benefit of their customers if they took the data that they do have access to and put it in an organized fashion, just even over the span of a couple of years of recent purchases over their stores. And that's a big task, I know, but just a little bit of that would go a long way. So the answer is kind of like yes and no.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And I don't think it's, an easy thing to do. Like you're saying, I think, we're living in a world where there's so much data, but it's not always easy to analyze it and store it and manage it. And that whole piece is huge. People think, oh, we'll collect a bunch of data and it'll be great. It's like, well, actually there's, a bunch of other steps, even just like the little things of cleaning the data, interpreting the data, and then doing that analysis is definitely no small feat. And as you're saying, that's, in-store data about people's drinks, and then also, I guess, ground coffees and the equipment that people are buying. And I wonder if, for the very motivated coffee person, if doing some grassroots consumer research about what folks are doing at home, what they're in their neighborhoods and their consumer base, I think would be a really interesting complement. But again, not trying to say that that's super simple or easy to accomplish.
And I might ask you what the danger of running your, let's say, small independent coffee shop according to large-scale data is.
Yeah. I think it's a great place to look at like general trends, but I don't think that you should, base 75% of your menu to be non-espresso based beverages, because that's what people are drinking in the West or something, So I think and this is a challenge across all data interpretation. So I think this is, a common issue is how to interpret data in such a way that you don't take it wholesale. You don't say 80, like literally the numbers are exactly the representation of the US, but as we know, the United States is a huge place with lots of diversity. And I think we do see that there's specialty coffee drinkers everywhere, as we've talked about, across incomes and geographies, but that also, doesn't mean that they're the same everywhere. There's definitely heterogeneity. And I think, embracing experimentation, but also keeping your specific customer base in mind is important. So I would think of this report as a great jumping off point to think about, things that you're not doing or trends that are happening that might be coming to your area soon if they haven't already. But I definitely wouldn't, change your menu to mimic exactly what past day consumption looked like amongst specialty coffee drinkers, if that makes sense.
So this kind of folds into, what you already have in terms of things that help you make a decision, but it shouldn't be like the thing that you use to just guide your business. And it feels like, where the data is so useful to show a snapshot of the industry, to your point in your question about like looking at the micro and of your customer base and what they need and what they have voted for with their dollars or their taste buds and all that stuff. That's the kind of that's where this data comes from, not vice versa. It's like chicken and the egg. We're running our businesses based on large scale surveys that represent a large generality, and that skews the data again and again and again. Or, is everyone making individually great decisions for their business that feed into data in this report?
Yeah, that's a good question. I do feel like, and this is my perception, is that going back, I feel like we've gone back to this a couple times, but I think it's super interesting, like the way that specialty coffee consumers self-define versus how I think many people in our industry define it. And I do feel like there's a bit of a missed opportunity in being more open to consumer-driven, like specialty coffee consumption trends. And I do think that that's changing, from this is good coffee, this is not good coffee. I would guess that still though, there's definitely opportunity to experiment and try new things and yeah.
Well,
I don't know if that answered your question.
It did. Well, a perfect example of that might be I think the last thing I wanted to cover here, we could cover so much in this conversation, but it sort of relates to ready to drink categories as an entry point for so many people. Personally, I think I had ready to drink. I don't know if it was categorized like that in the day in like 1999 or 98 when I was getting English toffee cappuccinos from a gas station. And it was definitely a weird drink, but it came out of a vending machine, and that's what my gateway was to caffeine and sugar. And, everyone's got a similar story. But you see a lot of specialty brands during COVID have the half-gallon lattes. And a lot of ready-to-drink stuff is now in specialty coffee retail and on shelves and stuff. Like, what does this report show when it comes to ready-to-drink category for specialty coffee, and why is it important that we pay attention to that?
Yeah, I think cold coffee generally was a category that surprised me quite a bit, in part because this survey was completed in January 2021, which is when, it's probably the coldest month in a lot of states in the US, and the strength of the cold coffee sector in general, and including RTD, was really strong. Like I'm looking for the number right now, but I think it was like 46% of specialty coffee drinkers had a cold drink, a non-espresso based beverage, the day before the survey was taken, and that's in January. So it's like people want cold drinks even when it's quite chilly outside. So I think as a category, to me, and I'm excited to see what happens when we collect data from the summer time frame. But in general, I was a little bit taken aback by how many people, especially young people and especially Hispanic Americans, are drinking cold coffees even in the winter. So that was impressive and interesting. As far as RTD goes, I was looking more at the larger category level about cold brew coffee and non-espresso based beverages generally, and just seeing that was a huge area of strength and growth even in these cold winter months. But yeah, as far as RTD goes, I mean, I think from other data that we've collected at the SCA, including like some of our work with Square, the point of sale organization, we definitely have seen growth in the RTD space, like getting growlers of cold brew coffee. I think, I'm seeing more and more coffee sodas that are being canned and ready to drink. And then, of course, there's all the existing larger brands of coffee. But I think that is a really interesting space. I think it's a tough space, though, for smaller folks, because there is more of that health and safety component to it. So I think there's probably some barriers to entry a little bit, but it's definitely a surprisingly strong category to me. And
it feels like there's a overlap between cold brew and cold coffee and ready to drink, and because you see it anywhere, like I don't know, Whole Foods has 100,000 different types of cold brews lined up in an impressive array, and so anybody drinking a cold coffee might also be drinking a bottled cold coffee, but it's batched, it's it's convenience, right? And it's almost, this is completely not provable by any means, but I get the sense that since we have become so much of more of a hyper branded industry where we have put so much effort into our look, our image, we're paying designers to like make us cohesive. Like it feels like people have more brand trust, like they trust the brand a lot to make something. Before it was made for you by us, and now it's just made by us, and you can pick it up. It's our brand, and love our brand. Pick this up, rather than like this craft individual experience that the coffee shop offers with like cappuccinos and things like that.
Yeah, no, I think kind of coming full circle to this idea that trust is kind of, it feels almost like the new wave a little bit. I know everyone's talking about the new wave, but it does seem like that is a really important, just having the brand trust and the messaging is, I think, will continue to be a really important thing. And it's like, we made this, you'll like it, right? Because it's by us. And I've definitely heard this anecdotally that like from friends, and if it's from X roaster, I know that I'm going to like it, or I'm excited to try it, because you feel that connection with that roaster, and you've worked with them or you've drank their coffee for a long time. So yeah, I think it's a really great point.
And it comes back to what we were talking about before, where people were just supporting their small business. They had that relationship they had with them, that experience, it really is a part of them, and we are, consumers, is as much as a survey like this and a report like this is all about, data, and it, there's people behind all of those thousands of relationships that go into all of these data points. And so it's built up over the years. And so it's not as convenient as to just say, well, you just need to move this number this way and this number that way. And then all of a sudden, presto, you're on trend and you're doing great. It's a little bit more complicated than that.
Yeah, I think listening, whether that means through the data that you collect at point of sale, or listening to your consumers through more like anecdotal qualitative information, but that sort of on the ground information is not something that should be devalued in any way, shape, or form. I think that that's super important, especially, as you're saying, during these times when community is such a strong driver for consumption, I think.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
So someone who runs a specialty coffee shop, who reads this report, what are maybe for you, would you hope that they take away from it and take action on as a result?
I think that the most actionable piece of data is to experiment, to try different, don't throw out your whole menu, keep your staples. But I think, trying lots of new different types of coffees, maybe getting into blended coffees, or, expanding your cold coffee selection. And I think engaging people in that experimentation process as much as possible, like getting consumers, your customers, excited and letting them know that you're trying new things. I think embracing experimentation without throwing out everything that the whole menu, I think will continue to be a really great place for specialty coffee shops to excite folks and provide that in-person experience that they can't get at home, and engage folks to come back and to be a place of like exciting new coffee things, and exposing people to new flavors.
Love it. Thank you so much, Katie. This was a great conversation. I appreciate you kind of breaking this stuff down for us, and I encourage everybody to download this survey, this report, and read it for themselves. There's a lot to chew on here. Again, Katie, wonderful to talk with you. Where can we go to learn more and stay in touch with what's going on in the SCA?
Yeah, I think the best place to keep up with us is, it's probably our Instagram, but if you'd like to check out some of our research, you can go to sca.coffee/research, and that will be all of our consumer research, including a link to download this report.
Thank you again, Katie. And this was, again, a great conversation. We really appreciate you.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for a great conversation and inviting me to your show.
Well, everyone, I really hope that that was a helpful conversation for you. And I do encourage you to download this report and read it for yourself. Lots of great information that I think is going to provide some more input to the kind of information that hopefully you've been collecting yourself in your neighborhood, in your local area. We need to pay attention to the big picture and also locally the ecosystem that we operate in. So a huge thank you to Katie von der Leith of the SCA for being on the show and explaining various parts of this report to us. We really appreciate you breaking down the information in this. Is very, very helpful. And if you want to download this report, you can go to ncausa.org to download the Specialty Coffee Breakout Report. I also have a link in the show notes that allows you to do the same thing. And you can also find some fantastic information and research over at the SCA's website. Go to sca.coffee/available research, and that will give you a breakdown of a ton of consumer, financial, and scientific research that the SCA has. So now, speaking of education, one of the things that really helps us in the process of developing a good intuition for decisions that we make in our businesses is by learning from others experiences running coffee businesses. And one great place to do that, of course, is Coffee Fest. Now, for over 25 years, Coffee Fest has been the best place to go, the best trade show and event to go to for learning about what it takes to run a thriving coffee shop, coffee retail operation. We have 4 shows this year, 3 of which have already happened, but there is one left, and that is in November in Portland, Oregon. There are 4 more coming up in 2022. You can find out all about these shows over at coffeefest.com. Look into the workshops, the seminars, lectures, trainings, the trade show floor, the competitions, and of course the community that comes along with a great event like this. So if you're looking for a resource that will both equip you for success and energize you and your staff, I highly recommend attending Coffee Fest. Go to their website to learn more over at coffeefest.com. And with that, that is the end of our show today. Everyone, thank you so much for taking the time to join me. And as always, I hope that this episode has truly given you keys to the shop.